Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/Reading with Your Kids, at Jedley Magic on Twitter, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram. Our guest today is Stephen Wunderli. He is here to celebrate his brand new book, Dear Moon. Before we bring Stephen in, we want to let you know about one of the innovations that my amazing daughter Alejandra has brought to not only the podcast, but to our website. You've heard me talk about the Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program now for a number of years. It's a wonderful program that really helps an author let the world know about their book. It really helps a book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. We've had so many authors tell us how much they appreciate this program. One of the ways they let us know they appreciate it is they come back again and again to have their books reviewed by our panel. And if our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. And some great promotional tools come along with that. Well, for years, we've been telling you to go to readingwithyourkids.com, click on the Author Services page at the top, scroll down. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. We would love it if you would visit readingwithyourkids.com. That's always a great option. There's so much information there. But if you are interested in the Certified Great Read program, you can go directly to CertifiedGreatRead.com. That's right, CertifiedGreatRead.com. That'll take you right to our Certified Great Read page. Check it out today, CertifiedGreatRead.com. Joining us right now from the great state of Utah, he is the author of a super important new book called Dear Moon, being published by our friends at Familius. Please welcome to the show, Stephen Wunderli. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great, and wish I was back in Boston. They have a lot of great museums back there, so it's a terrific place. I love that place.
Well, you don't want to be back in Boston right now because we can't go out to any museums.
Oh, that's true. I forgot. I'm in Utah where we don't have any. We have museums, but yeah, we have wilderness, which you can go out to every day because no one's out there. So yeah. It doesn't feel like quarantine when you can go hiking every day.
That's right. We're recording this. We're not sure when it's going to be published, but we are recording this in the middle of the great quarantine of 2020. The folks who listen to the show regularly know that even though I live in the city of Boston, my property backs up to a wildlife sanctuary. So we are able to get out and walk the dog and do all that kind of stuff. But, there's no museum going right now, which is probably for the best, flatten out that curve and all that. But soon you'll be able to come back to Boston and experience the museums, the Esplanade, the concerts, and the restaurants and all that other stuff. But right now, I'm really excited to learn about Dear Moon. Tell us about this book, please.
Well, it's a book that was a little difficult to write because I had been through an interesting experience. I lost my mother, and I was 58 years old when she passed, and you think, well, that should be not so hard. I mean, it was expected. She'd had a stroke 4 years earlier, and so she had difficulty expressing herself, which actually made things really funny. Conversing with her, she just said some very funny things because her pronouns were always mixed up. Uh-huh. And I went to visit her one day and I said, "Oh, good, you're here. I just put the apples on the floor." And I had to think for a minute. "Oh, you just put dinner on the table. Okay, got it." So it was kind of delightful being with her in that state, but when she passed, it was more difficult than I expected. Mm-hmm. I did feel a little untethered, and I started writing this book because the great grandkids, we talked with them and we had a lot of tender moments with them. But in looking for books that talk about death, I couldn't find anything that wasn't overtly religious, and I didn't want to write a book like that. I wanted to write a book that allowed the parents to be the teacher and the book to be more of a catharsis for emotions. And so allow kids to find some symbolism in the book, allow parents to find their own symbolism, talk about it in the way that they want to talk about it, and let the book really be about friendship and a life cycle and end on a way that is, that has hope and joy, not in any kind of dark way. So anyway, that was the challenge and that I gave myself and just started writing and wrote a number of different things and this seemed to resonate the most with me. So I started sketching it out and putting even more words to it and then taking a lot of words away until it felt right.
That's a beautiful story. I love that this book was inspired by the love that you had for your mom. You know, it kind of came out after that loss and after those feelings, but those feelings of we were talking before the show of being untethered and the feelings of loss, they were present in you because you had this love for your mom.
Well, it's, love is an interesting emotion because it transcends anything human, mm-hmm. I believe. Mm-hmm. It's an emotion that is, I like this saying, but it's an emotion that's beyond what evolution would require. So it's an emotion that is much bigger than we are. And I think sometimes the reality of it, settles in our hearts in a very unexpected way. And I was very close to my mom. She's the one that pushed me to be creative. And being creative, growing up, that's a weird thing for a kid to be. You play football and you write poetry, so I would hide stuff under my bed. I'd write poetry and hide it and never show anybody. And my mom was really great. She's like, well, look, you have a talent for this, so just keep doing it. And I'm proud of you, regardless of what you do. And it turned out that I wasn't a very good football player, but I was a better writer. And so she and I were very, very close. And we spent a lot of time together over the years. It never had a cross moment between us and was always delightful. And even toward the end of her life when her miscommunications were just hysterical, I used to sit down with her and have her sing songs. And then I'd record them because it was so funny because she'd get the lyrics wrong and then we'd laugh together. And then when she was gone, like even in that sort of, incapacitated state, there was still a big sense of loss. Mm-hmm. And that's just hard to deal with. And that's what I say, that sense of love is much bigger and a much heavier weight than you realize until something like that happens.
Yeah. You're right. Anytime we love, we take a risk because I heard somebody say one time that every time we fall in love, every time we have a relationship, it's bound to end in sorrow. It may end up in a terrible way because people are angry with each other. It may end up that someone passes, may end up that just folks grow apart. But there's still that sorrow because every relationship is going to end at some point, and so you're kind of taking a risk every time you choose to open up your heart and to love. But I think it's a risk that's so worth taking.
You're right, and it is a risk, and it's a rare thing when a relationship transcends the physical relationship. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, especially in this book, is that these two boys, and I think two boys at this age where they're just full of adventure and curiosity, and I call them the shirtless boys of summer. That's that age when you're like 8 years old and you have just enough freedom to traverse yards and run through people's gardens and just explore your own limits. And this is that age, and these boys have this sense of love for each other that transcends their physical relationship. And boys have that. And I think that too often, and girls have it too. I mean, they definitely do. But I, you know, I'm a boy, so I don't know exactly the depth of that, of what girls feel. I'm still trying to understand them. But these boys, I do understand, because I grew up in a time when there was, like where you live, there was a forest behind our home, and we were always building rockets and race cars and ropes and Tarzan jungles, and it was a time where I still will see one of my boyhood friends, and something sort of magic comes alive in me. Like that's the kid that I built a treehouse with, and that we fell out of, and that we were scavenging wood for, and we would steal apples and hide up in the treehouse. And I mean, you know, all those memories like bring back this sort of big emotion. And so I wanted to capture that as well.
Boy, oh boy, you know, I am just conjuring up memories. You're talking about falling out of tree houses. I grew up in the city. Where I grew up, we didn't have a wildlife sanctuary behind our home, but we had the town, the city, the barn. We called it the town barn, but it was where all the DPW trucks and the garbage trucks were parked overnight. And it was about 3 stories high, and we would find a way to climb up on that. And one of my buddies decided he was going to bring a big wheel up there, one of those little plastic tricycles, and he drove it off the top of the roof. And as expected, broke many bones. And it's just,
you know,
and you know, now we're reconnected via social media, and he posted, you know, a little hello, I hope you guys are all well video the other day. And it just, you know, it was just like we were right back there again when we're out hanging out with him the rest of the summer as he's in his body cast. Outside.
Well, that's funny, because there's a point in your life, like about 8 years old, where you don't have a well-developed sense of fear yet. So you're doing things like, behind me there was a pasture that had a few mangy horses in it. And so we used to, like, you know, we were 8, 9 years old. We'd just lure these horses in with carrots and lettuce and celery, whatever we could find, or apples that we stole. And you get these horses close to you, and then you grab the mane and try to hop on and just try to stay on as long as you could. And just funny things that you do as boys that like are part of your childhood. And like you know, I mean, you connect, you know, 30 years later, and you go, gosh, I have this space in my heart where there was something really magical about our friendship. And I wanted to be able to express what happens when that disappears.
Right.
When the friendship disappears, but that place in your heart, that magical little space, doesn't disappear. That never leaves you. And we talked about my mom's passing, and that there's that part of me that she will always hold. And and friendship is the same way. And childhood separation, whether it's death or just moving away, there's still that space in there. And I wanted kids to know that there's a space still in there for the love, the friendship, the adventure, and especially all those great memories. You need to let go of the bad ones when you got punished. But you gotta remember the good ones. What adventure.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy that this book is available, because I think it's so important. We're, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the middle of the hopefully at least in the middle, and I'm hoping we're closer to the end. And when we come out of this, because we are going to come out of this, things are going to be different. It's going to take it. You know, we're certainly not going to. You know, we're not going to get word. Okay, the quarantine is over. Back to life as usual. That's not going to happen. If we do get back to life as it was before, it's going to take a long time. There's going to be a long period where we're adjusting, and kids are going to be going. Hopefully, they're going to be going back to school in the fall, but when they go back, things are going to be different. The friendships that they had when the schools closed in March, they're going to have been changed, and they might not be there. their best friend may be afraid of them because their parents are so afraid of their kids going in. And you know, things are going to be different, and kids are going to be dealing with loss, if not the direct loss of a loved one and a friend. They're going to have lost a lot of friendships, and they're going to have changed. And so this book is really going to be an important resource for families, I think, at the beginning of the school year and beyond, because these conversations, families need to have these conversations.
I appreciate that, because I couldn't agree more. I hope that through this whole quarantine, we haven't become totally dependent on social media to give us our connection fix. I think humans need more than that. And we need human touch, especially if it's not spoken. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to sometimes just sit with somebody we love and just rub shoulders or hold hands, or just sit close enough that we can feel each other's breathing. Mm-hmm. That's just so life affirming. And I think you're right. Kids are gonna struggle when they go back, because kids especially need that human touch. Mm-hmm. You know, they need someone to hug them. They need someone to pat them on the shoulders. They need to be able to give you a high five. Need to, and give you a little shoulder to knock you around a little bit. Some of the boys, I mean, that interaction, I think, is really important. And so I think you're right that there will be a sense of loss as we go back to life, but it won't be the life that we've had.
Yeah. And one of the things we talk about a whole lot here on the podcast is that having those conversations when parents get together and go, hey, we have to talk to Johnny and Sally about this is really important. So after dinner, we got to sit them down. We have to have this conversation. Those never go well. It just doesn't matter what the topic is. They just never go well. But when you have a tool like Dear Moon, where you can sit down and read the story and then let the conversation happen naturally, that's a beautiful thing. And that's where some real connection and real memories and real comfort comes from, I think.
Well, yes. And that's the power of literature. And movies can sometimes do this for us too, but curling up with somebody that you love when you're that young and feeling the images go through your mind while you're in a safe place, that's the power of good literature and fiction, is that allows you to be in a place where you can experience hard emotions, but you're still safe. Mm-hmm. And I think what's important when you create that space is to not have rules. In other words, I tried really hard to do this, is I don't want to set up an expectation for the kids of what really happens during the separation. I want it to be something that they can interpret, mm-hmm. but accept and confront. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what's beautiful about life itself, is that each of us find our way in a different way and understand, there's something greater than us, mm-hmm. even if we only think of it as the universe. There's something greater than us, and there's something next to us that demands our greatest effort, and that's usually a friend or a parent or a spouse. Yeah. And when you accept those two things, then your life, I think, becomes very different, because you feel like when you lose somebody, you've given your best part to them, and you've given them to a greater something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said about setting up that safe space and that experience. You know, when families sit down to have those quote unquote conversations, you know, it's usually you're looking at the person and it's almost like a confrontation. And it's the complete opposite when you're reading a book. And even if you're reading a book with your teenager, my niece comes over and we still read together. And we're never looking at each other. It's always sitting on the couch next to each other. And we're, like you said, we're bumping shoulders. It's safe. no matter what, no matter whether she's reading a physics textbooks to me, or she's, reading a story that's kind of poignant, or watching a movie on TV that's bringing all sorts of emotions. We have that connection and that touch and that safe space, and that's so important for families, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I also believe that there's something in the way that the world works that is very comforting to kids, and we stop and notice it. The moon does rise every night. The stars come out every night. It's predictable, and I think there's something about that predictability that tells kids that things are sort of happening on schedule and within routine. And kids need the comfort of that routine. And I think you kind of have to point it out to them, like, go out and see the stars every night before bed, and wake up to the sun coming up. I mean, those are things that are simple, and they're in nature. They're part of the universe that we're all part of. And there's a certain amount of comfort there. So kids will sort of latch on to that routine and feel comforted by that as well.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you talking about the fact that this book was inspired by the loss of your mom. How did writing this book, how did the journey of bringing this book to life change you?
Well, I think that's a good question, because the first thing that happens is that you find yourself, just as I start to write a few sentences, I find myself being emotional. And you don't know why, it's just starting to come out, and you're emotional, and you think, I found myself saying, hi Mom, like I'm working on this book, and, you just you try to deal with it the best you can, but you find yourself a little bit emotional. And the other thing that changed me writing this book is it brought to memory friends of mine who have passed that I hadn't really cataloged in the right way, and I in a hopeful way, in a way that left you feeling like there's still joy in the life that they lived, and so the first, I'll tell you, the first one that I remember, the first person I knew that died was a kid up the street from me, and he was older than me by about 10 years, but he went to the Vietnam War and never came back. And, and he was one of those kids that as a teenager was kind of a wild kid and long hair and funny, and we all sort of were a little bit afraid of him because he was older. But he was, but we knew him, and then we didn't come back. That was sort of, we tucked that away. And I remember seeing his parents years later and just trying to fathom the sorrow that they felt, and I couldn't. And it didn't hit me until, and this whole book, it has a lot of things in it that are interesting and also, autobiographical. My first child, when she was 2, she was diagnosed with cancer. And so handing her off to the doctor for that first surgery, was like you wanted the world to stop before you took her into surgery. Cause there's this chance that she's not coming back. And so so in your mind, you want the world to just stop for an hour so you can read another book together. Cause she was only 2 years old. And so there was that whole element of what my desires are versus the way the world works. And so I had that emotion come out, which I hadn't felt for a long time. I had the emotion of losing a friend. And then the other thing that came out was I had a friend that committed suicide when I was in college. And he and I, I was the last person he talked to, and he was just struggling with some drug addictions. And I was in a class with him in college, and we'd grown up together. And he had a lot of questions for me, and I couldn't answer all of them, but I sensed that he just needed someone to sort of be next to, that's the human part of who we are is, we don't have all the answers, but we can sit next to somebody And that came out as I was reading this, because I had seen his dad about 4 years ago, and his dad still could barely talk to me because me and this super close, and we almost looked alike too. We looked like we could be brothers. And so his dad couldn't talk to me. He was still emotional, and it's been 20 years. Wow. So there's some holes that are never filled, but that emotion came back, and when I finished this book, and when I first saw the cover and the illustration, which I was really happy with, I felt a sense of something leaving me, which is interesting. It was a sense that there was a bit of a weight that was gone, and I could look back on people's lives that I've known and that I've lost, and look back with a sense of happiness and peace rather than uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, the book was a little bit of a purging for me, is that I could look at it with a sense of hope, and I hope that's what writing does for everybody that writes. Mm-hmm. It does for me, but there's few things that really draw that out of you and make you a better person. And I think writing has a way of doing that. It makes you face emotions that you wouldn't normally face. And so, that's what it did for me. I think it made me a more understanding and a more at peace person. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people who read Dear Moon, they're going to have very similar experience. I think it sounds like a great book that's going to spark a lot of conversations that are going to be beneficial for kids. But I also know, as I was telling you before the show, reading Tommy DePaulo's Clown of God with my kids when they were young, and they loved that book. It was meaningful for them, but it's also really meaningful for me. And I have the feeling that there are a lot of families who are going to cherish Dear Moon in the same way.
No, thank you. I hope so. I hope it does for them what it did for me to write it, and has a opportunity for them to connect. So thanks for having me on. This is you're a wonderful guy. I did a little bit of due diligence on you, and knowing that you have been to my wife's elementary school in Greenfield, Massachusetts, to make kids happy is really cool.
Well, thank you very much. Cool. Hey, before we go, we want to know where people can go online to connect with you and find out more about Stephen Wunderli.
Well, right now I don't have a web page up. I'm sort of old school, but they can Google me and look at what I've done and other stuff I've done. And I've got a Facebook page, so you can always find me on Facebook. That's probably the best way. Just chat me a message, and I'd love to talk. I love hearing from kids. I get really funny letters from kids about my books all the time. Hopefully I haven't encouraged kids to do things that are too wild in their childhood, but I get really wonderful stories back from kids. Great letters, so it's really fun. Find me on Facebook, Stephen R. Wunderli.
Excellent. We've been having a wonderful time speaking to the author of Dear Moon, brand new book from our friends at Familia, Stephen Wunderli. Stephen, thanks so much for spending this time with us tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it, and good luck to all.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Katie Zhao. She'll be here to talk about The Dragon Warrior, her debut middle grade fantasy. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Stephen Wunderli. Also want to say hi and thank you to our buddies over at Familia's Publishing. Also want to thank my incredible team, starting with my amazing daughter, Alejandra Doherty, my producer, Fatima Khan, my awesome author, Ambassador Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for telling your friends about the podcast. I want to thank you for subscribing to the podcast on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. But most of all, I want to thank you for helping to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.